And off we go. So, functional medicine and the immune system. This is really an introduction. I'm hoping that we will have a much better setup for the subsequent sessions, and more about that later. I hope you'll get some useful information out of this presentation. We're only going to graze the real surface of the lifestyle topics. There's really a great deal more that needs to be covered, and I plan to cover that in a series of additional sessions when we'll break out each of the lifestyle measures and go for and do a deep dive. So there'll be lots of time for Q&A there. Right now, if I do say something that gives you a sense that you'd like to ask a question, you're probably not alone, so go ahead and chat that question, and Joyce will be in the background consolidating them. So let's move on to our first slide. What is the greatest risk factor for severe COVID-19 syndrome? Well, I think that it's pretty clear. It's inflammation. So who has pre-existing inflammation? And these are the high-risk groups that you've been seeing. And so the important thing here is diabetes. Yes, it's an inflammatory disease. Hypertension, obesity. You've heard about people with other inflammatory conditions like chronic infections. Asthmatics seem, because of their chronically inflamed lungs, to have an issue going on. Breathers of polluted air, that's pretty clear from some of the China work. Smokers is right now controversial. There is some stuff coming out of France, and I was not able to review it yet today. I'm hoping they'll let me into their site. But looking at nicotine and saying maybe nicotine is somehow a benefit. It's not clear to me whether that has to be inhaled nicotine or whether it could be nicotine patches. Please do not corner the market on nicotine patches. If that does turn out to be something therapeutically successful, we would really like it to go to the sick people and not get bought up and hoarded. So it's too soon to say whether that's actually a thing. But the other thing to understand, and I'm hearing this a lot from my patients, is that inflammation is not necessarily evil. Inflammation, in fact, is critical to triggering the immune process, and it sets off a chain reaction. It's like one of these Rube Goldberg machines. You'll probably remember seeing videos or even the old cartoons. You push a button, and it opens a trap door, and it knocks over a bottle of water, which fills a bowl on a scale. And then the scale tips over, and as it tips, it lights a match, which sets fire to a rope, which burns through, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. In the case of inflammation, this chain reaction also sets into motion a simultaneous opposite anti-inflammatory process, which is a little bit delayed. So you get your flame up, you get your dispersal of chemicals, and then you get something that damps it down, anti-inflammatory braking. Now, the cytokine storm is what happens when the anti-inflammatory braking system fails, and the pro-inflammatory side just accelerates uncontrollably. Today, you'll learn about natural and simple lifestyle and nutritional strategies that can help ensure that when the time comes, your brakes are in good working order. Unlike powerful drugs used to treat autoimmune disease, these compounds have no documented cases of running away with the anti-inflammatory piece and causing immunosuppression. We'll be giving you the safe range of doses, and we'll also send you a handy printable chart with that information along with a Zoom video of this session. Wrong button. So there are two kinds of immunity, innate and adaptive, and all mammals have innate, but adaptive's a later invention. Innate reacts the first time it sees a pathogen, it helps kill it, and it also turns on an acquired response so that you get the antibody memory cells coming online 10 to 30 days afterwards. Natural killer cells are one part of innate, and this is the part that can lead to the cytokine storm. So Innate is present at birth. Adaptive has to be acquired through exposures after birth. Although we get mom's antibodies, this humoral antibody, through the placenta and through breast milk, and as long as we breastfeed, we're kind of piggybacking off of mom's immune system. But the innate system is present at birth. I want to highlight just a few things on this slide. The natural killer cells are the backbone of innate viral immunity, and they're also important for recognizing and fighting cancer. And I want to point out that the chemicals that the innate systems release and the antigen presentation, which we're not going to cover in this, are what allow the B cells, the memory cells, to start antibody production. Now, some of you may have had a moderate reaction to Shingrix as a vaccine, and that's because to make the vaccine work, the antigen presentation happens, but they need to produce cytokines. So they put cytokines, irritants effectively, that rile up this system, particularly the natural killer cells, in a viral vaccine to allow it to attack and learn to attack the virus. So you have to essentially ring the fire alarm to get the immune system's attention. There's all sorts of factors that influence the innate and acquired immune system. So I mentioned pollution, diet and additives, food antigens, lifestyle, stress is very big. Many medications have an effect here, chronic infections. So all sorts of external environmental factors, but also internal environment. Xenobiotics means pesticides, phthalates, other compounds. Gut flora and the microbiome are very, very important. Oxidative stress and other factors also influence the immune system, both the adaptive and the innate. Those bacteria in your gut, they play a very profound role in signaling, and they're part of the braking mechanism, as is good levels of vitamin D. So many people get exposed to COVID. About 75% of people, we're now thinking, have asymptomatic disease. Some people don't get infected, but they do develop antibodies. Some have a mild infection and some have a serious infection. So what are the factors? Well, what your exposome, what else are you exposed to? Mucosal immunity, which we'll be talking about in a moment. Neutralizing antibodies, which is that acquired humoral thing. That's what the antibody testing is hoping to find. Viral receptors. Now, this is genetic, and we'll be talking about the ACE2 receptor in a couple of minutes. But these viral receptors, there's probably both sexual and genetic variation that could be a factor here. The innate immune response, if that innate immune response is healthy because you're in good balance, then you're more likely, the better that is, the less likely you are to get infected, and the more likely you are to become immune by just being exposed and making antibodies. And anti-inflammatory cytokines, and those are some of the things that we're going to be seeking to increase in your body. And I want to emphasize this does not make you more likely to get the virus, but it does make you less likely to get very sick from it. So we mentioned mucosal immunity a few slides ago. This is a cross-section of the inside of, let's call it the inside of your nose. These are epithelial cells. And there's a layer of mucus in your nose, you've probably noticed. And there's also a layer of mucus in your stomach and your intestines. And this layer of mucus is full of IgA antibodies. And that's those little double Y-shaped things here. And these attach. And you have already got secretory IgA against coronavirus, at least the coronavirus class. And it's already working for you. It's a type of acquired immunity, but it's a generalized type. And so these IgAs are capable of glomming on to coronavirus. And it acts like flypaper and traps the virus, and then it gets swallowed and dipped in an acid bath in the stomach. It'd be interesting to see whether, but year or 2 years from now, people who were taking proton pump inhibitors had a higher rate of gastrointestinal symptoms from the COVID-19 virus or SARS-CoV-2. I also want to put a pitch in for nasal colloidal silver. You can buy it in nasal spray that's got tiny little silver particles in it. They just sit here on the mucus and they deactivate the virus. They'll deactivate any virus and any bacteria. So that's a useful thing. I always use that when I fly on an airplane. And airplane travel is a risk factor. We're about to see why. Because it lowers the mucus. You dry out in that dry airplane air. So when you've got lots of mucus, you've got this inner mucus layer that keeps the virus from getting down to the cell so it can't glom onto the receptor. Then you've got this outer mucus layer full of antibody. And so it's an obstacle course, a barbed wire fence, if you will, to keep the virus away, to the extent that you don't make a lot of IgA, which happens in people with chronic infections. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But that IgA, then the virus is able to attach, and then it can get in and start hijacking the cell and turning it into a virus factory. Stress reduces IgA. So this is one of the many places where stress and stress reduction comes in as a lifestyle factor. Overexercising. While it may help you feel a little bit better in the short term, psychologically can also be a risk factor. Moderate, gentle exercise, not excessive exercise, is really important right now. There's also some thought that colostrum, which you can take orally, cow colostrum or bovine colostrum it's called, might be protective in the intestine. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, and I've never seen any studies on squirting it in your nose. But if a person was on ulcer medications like proton pump inhibitors, it might make sense to use bovine colostrum to try to pinch hit for the fact that you impair your mucus. People who are chronic users of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen also might want to add bovine colostrum just kind of to pinch hit. Okay, there it is, the COVID-19 virion. And there are four proteins that we are interested in. The S protein is this triangular shaped thing. It's actually pointy. It's called the spike protein because of its shape. You have something called M protein, which is important in potentially in viral reproduction, and E protein, which is both of these others that are circled are actually targets for the acquired immunity system. So as we start making antibodies post-infection, we do start attacking all three of these virus. The true neutralizing antibody that we referred to in one of the slides earlier would be the one that got the spike protein and prevented it from attaching to the cells. And that's kind of the holy grail. And most immune systems, we hope, will produce those. So here's the viral cycle. It gets in through the eyes, nose, and mouth. It gets into the epithelial cell, unwinds its viral DNA, and essentially hijacks the cell, causes the cell to make new RNA. It's an RNA virus. And then the cell basically packages it, and off we go. So these are all super important background things that are relevant. So I'm going to just skip over this slide because we know that the one take-home lesson here is that the S protein attaches to this ACE2 receptor, which is present on heart, blood vessels, heart, kidney, intestine, respiratory tract, and this is the doorway into you. And the S protein has to attach to this. Certain people may have an S protein, an ACE2 receptor that is even more desirable or easily attached to. Others may have one that is somewhat resistant. But ACE2 is actually, it has lots of activity. It's protective to the respiratory epithelium. And there's this stuff inside your lungs called surfactant, which is kind of a detergent. And when you get massive amounts of viruses and they attach to ACE2, it's thought that it reduces the amount of surfactant you make and sets you up for respiratory failure, and that may be part of its activity. Another thing about ACE2 is that it is a part of the immune system braking mechanism. So if it's disabled by the virus, then the braking mechanism is also impaired. So we're going to basically just skip over this one, except to say that once the virus binds to macrophages, which are the big amoebas that go around eating things, the macrophages recognize it as a pathogen and they start releasing all kinds of compounds, interleukin-1 beta being one of the more important ones, but a host of other compounds, which we'll talk about in a minute. You get destruction and fibrosis of lung tissue, and this is scary. And I'm going to jump ahead and just say that we have one natural compound in the list at the end of this, quercetin, Quercetin, which has the property of preventing the macrophage-induced fibrosis. And so that's something I think that we should be considering giving to anyone with symptomatic COVID. This inflammasome, you've probably heard that phrase. These are essentially a suite of gene products, and they have different patterns. And so you can have, when certain genes are turned on in the cell, the reaction products for a certain pattern. It's like maybe if there's a fire, you send out the firemen. Maybe if it's a riot, you send out the National Guard. And so the defense mechanism has different patterns of approach to these things. So inflammasomes are specific to, is this a bacteria? Is this an injury? Is it a reaction to pro-inflammatory cytokines? But the most important inflammasome that's being activated for COVID is this NLRP3. And this is the one that contains the stuff that leads to the cytokine storm. So we'll be talking towards the end of the talk about products that are known to inhibit the inflammasome. And I want to emphasize again, this does not make you immunosuppressed. It makes you immunomodulated, immunobalanced. And that's what we're after in functional medicine, balance. So Yuping San, an ancient Chinese herbal decoction, also very good at breaking up the inflammasome. And there's a list here of all of the good things that it does. And what's important here is this is called jade windscreen. It's got astragalus, which is widely used in Chinese medicine, aterocyclides, and something called Siler, but it blocks NLRP3 and it blocks NF-kappa B, which is another very important pro-inflammatory pathway. So this is, my acupuncture colleagues are all recommending this, and I did some review and I'm inclined to agree. There's good data that this might be beneficial in helping modulate the immune system and just keep you balanced so that you don't get that late rebound phenomenon where the disease comes roaring back. And I think that's essentially the loss of the braking mechanisms through attrition from virus. But I'm not sure that that's the mechanism. That is a speculation on my part. So here's NF-kappa, here's tumor necrosis factor, which does a lot of things. It's called tumor necrosis factor. So guess what? It helps kill, it activates T cells, natural killer T cells, goes after cancers, induces apoptosis. It helps mature dendritic cells. So again, this is an inflammatory compound, and yet it triggers all sorts of good things in the immune system. It turns on the brake. That's what the Tregs are. Those are regulatory T cells that act as brakes on the immune system. But it also induces vascular damage and increases capillary permeability, which may have something to do with the pulmonary syndrome of essentially shock lung or adult respiratory distress syndrome that people with COVID-19 get. So there is work being done to block this. We have lots of drugs that block tumor necrosis factor. You've seen them advertised on TV. They're the psoriasis drugs. They're the Remicades of the world, and they are monoclonal antibodies directed against either tumor necrosis factor or tumor necrosis factor receptor. But the point to make here is we have drugs, they're FDA approved, they are sitting in pharmacies, and they are not pills, they're injections. So probably people aren't going to run out and sequester them. Research is going on right now to see if this is a treatment that could be given at the early stages, like when a person starts to get short of breath. I think this is very promising. It's a little further downstream than I'd like. I'd like to get all the way up to that NLRP3 and keep that from being kicked off. But this is a place where I think we have, first of all, a supply, and second of all, the ability to mobilize quickly. So I'll be very interested in seeing in that research. We should have stuff coming out of New York by next month on this one. And this is tumor necrosis alpha, right? This is where the chloroquine and the hydroxychloroquine come from, because the researchers in France and in China were like, okay, what have we got? Oh, well, we've got this and it's available. And so I just threw this paper up here because, among other things, the date, 1997. So we're looking at Plaquenil being around for a long time. It's been used for rheumatoid arthritis for at least that long. And first you discover it works and then you figure out the mechanism. So I think that's how this paper shows up in 1997. So it was a reasonable thing to do. And the problem with these drugs is side effects. And those monoclonals I mentioned a minute ago, they're not great either. So we come to what can we do that has no evidence of harm, that has a long-term track record, and that will only help. And you can't read the fine print, but that's all right, because we're talking about nutrition, stress, sleep, exercise, and connection. So start with stress. You'll also be getting, by the way, a little stress assessment, lifestyle assessment handout. You can score yourself and see where you need work. That'll be part of the packet I send out after I'm going to edit this video a little at the beginning, I think. Know when you're stressed. Exercise, but not too hard. Deep breathing, but not in the room where someone's coughing. Well-ventilated spaces would be a good idea. Be in nature. Talk to people. Walk it out. Don't hold it. Guided imagery and guided visualization, I think, are an excellent piece. I'm hoping to produce something along those lines that just walks you through your immune system so that you can look at and love your immune system. Dr. Bernie Siegel, who is a cancer doctor, who does a lot of work with guided imagery, has some excellent things online if you want to go looking for guided imagery for the immune system. He's got some very creative imagery there that is quite visual and highly compelling. Qigong and Tai Chi, most of the literature is in Chinese, and there's a lot of it. The fact that certain movements and certain sounds and certain sequences of breathing could somehow impact the immune system would not surprise me in the least. Getting rid of it into a journal is a good idea. Yoga and meditation, whatever you ever learned along these lines, it's time to dust it out. And we'll be giving you much more in the way of handouts and information at the next session. Shinrin-yoku, I hadn't heard of this before, forest bathing. So you go out into the woods and you just breathe and hold yourself out and let the beams of whatever energy there are enter your body. Sounds like a cool thing. I've been doing quite a bit of forest bathing, although I didn't know it had a name. This just one paper, and I'm sorry you can't read the reference, but these are just showing that yoga and meditation have major effects on the inflammatory markers and markers of DNA damage and reactive oxygen species. So things that you wouldn't necessarily expect you to be able to think your way out of. Meditation has been shown to be very effective. These are placebo trials. So a few things about sleep. Set a regular bedtime. Don't use devices late at night. I recommend using yellow blocking or blue blocking glasses. I have a nice pair of wraparound goggles, and I read on my Kindle at night, but I put those on. I don't think that the blue blocker apps on the phone are good enough to really achieve what we're after here. Sleeping in a dark room is very helpful. 2 hours at least. Don't eat close to bedtime. Really reduce your alcohol. That can be hard when you're sitting around, but alcohol definitely impairs sleep. Try to sleep when it's dark or make the room dark, and relax before bedtime. This is probably not the time to go to the New York Times website and read about COVID-19. How much exercise? Well, 150 minutes per week. Break a sweat. That's really probably the main thing. Do you have to run? No. Running is time efficient, but it's also more likely to injure you. It is not, however, more likely to give you arthritis. And we'll be talking more about that in the exercise module. Don't overdo. Stay hydrated. You know, all common sense advice that you could have gotten from your grandmother, but all of this is actually scientifically validated. Food and nutrition. There are three mechanisms that I really want to take a moment and emphasize these. Food balances inflammatory pathways. All of these bright colors of vegetables, of fruits and vegetables, eating the rainbow, that concept, extremely important. And there are compounds in there that are anti-inflammatory. There are compounds that are antioxidant. And that brings us to the second thing, reducing oxidative stress. The very act of eating generates stress to your body. It generates inflammation. It's part of the process. It's supposed to be like that, which is why when you're eating fruits and vegetables, you're getting on board along with the inflammatory compounds, you're getting anti-inflammatory compounds. The more heavily you process food, the less of those antioxidants remain. Unfortunately, they're volatile and they evaporate. If you are going to cut up fruits and vegetables for use over the week or something like that, or have carrot sticks, put them in a sealed glass container and fill it with waters to exclude air, and that will help keep the antioxidant levels higher. And of course, fermented foods. The gut microbiome is an extremely important input. As I said earlier, that really makes a difference in terms of making sure that your braking assembly is in good shape. When the pro-inflammatory pedal hits the metal, you better be able to turn on the brake. Some prescriptive advice, 9 to 13 servings, that's a half cup serving. That's really, really hard to do. Now, if you're eating it, if you juice and you blend and you use perhaps a freeze-dried fruit and vegetable formula, you can get to 8 or 9. And 13 is aspirational, if you ask me. If you're eating that many fruits and vegetables, you will be getting enough dietary fiber. But what's your index? You should poop every day. It should hold its own. It should be a formed poop ideally, but you should poop every day. Eating fermented vegetables and probiotic foods helps. There's also a commercial probiotic called Align. And if people are really having constipation issues, I do have them use that. Although I find that if they use that for a little while and they increase their fiber, that they can generally stop using it. Immune offenders, added sugars and processed carbohydrates, excessive saturated fat. You know, probably bacon grease tastes great, but you probably really shouldn't be cooking your spinach in it. Not right now. We don't need the extra free radicals. And the high glycemic foods, insulin, anything that raises your insulin levels is going to be pro-inflammatory. And it's going to temporarily, if your blood sugar gets above 170, to you diabetics and borderlines, if your blood pressure gets above if your blood sugar gets above 170, your white blood cells actually slow down measurably in response to an antigenic stimulus. That is to say, when you ring the fire alarm, the fire engine is moving at 20 miles an hour instead of 70 miles an hour. You don't want that. So let's talk about biologic plausibility. A lot of this stuff has been looked at in reference to cancer and in reference to autoimmune disease. There is a broad body of literature. I have, at your request, I will send you the references. There are about 170 of them relating to the stuff that I'm going to be talking about now. And so we look at curcumin, quercetin, melatonin, ECGC, which is a green tea derivative, and resveratrol, which is the, well, among the things it's found in grapes, and it's a purple pigment. There's been a lot of research on this because it seems to be related to a longevity gene that helps rebuild your telomeres. And so we're all very interested in living as long as possible, although right now our focus is in getting through this pandemic as alive as possible. So interesting about melatonin, and that's probably one of the reasons that sleep is so important as an anti-inflammatory, is that it is an inhibitor directly of the NLRP3 inflammasome. So there's an M protease that is needed by the COVID, by 2019 nCoV, SARS-CoV-2, whatever you want to call it. It was just discovered this year. And there are already known M protease inhibitors. I talked about this on the air a couple of weeks ago that seem to be promising. That ACE2 that's sticking up off of your cells has to be cleaved before the virus can climb onto it. And this main protease, M protease, is the cleavage. It's also called furin, I believe. So unfortunately, one of the things that makes this difficult in a rapidly moving field is that things have multiple names, just like the virus itself. We have virologists fighting over what to call it. And such is life, I guess. Here are the natural M protease inhibitors: quercetin, curcumin, ECGC. So you'll see there's overlap with the previous list. Sorry. All right, back to where we were. So this is just to understand our, in the next block of slides, we're talking about what do we mean when we say conditional, limited, moderate, and strong. And for doctors or other medical people, this is very similar to the category A, B, C for pregnancy. It's like C, well, it causes cancer in massive overdoses to pregnant rats, but we've never seen a problem with the human babies, so we're not sure. Don't use it. One study, so limited evidence means there's one study. Moderate means there's at least two studies that show correlation between intervention and outcome, and there's a biological mechanism. Strong means, yeah, we've got the biological mechanism, it makes sense, and then on the risk of harm, you get what those are, and none of these have a severe risk of harm. Let's go on and look at curcumin, and the doses 500 to 1,000 twice daily of absorbed enhanced curcumin. And we know that there's, and here's multiple references. This refers to the reference list that is available on request. Modulation of the NLRP3 inflammasome, risk of harm mild, gotta love it, right? This is what's in curry. Quercetin, apple skin, onion skin, 1 gram twice a day. If you get the a concentrated stuff called a phytosome. You can take half that much. This is important. This is the only thing that has been shown to be anti-fibrotic. It stabilizes the mast cells. It also has this inflammasome activation modulation, and it slows down viral replication. So references for all of these as listed. ECGC, there is a significant risk of harm. Very rarely with extracts, people get hepatotoxicity. My attitude is do the food if you can, 4 cups of green tea every day. It's not too bad. And right now that you're home, it's downright easy. So that would be a recommendation I would put out universally, because you can wash down all this other stuff with nice cups of green tea. And for those of you who can't handle caffeine, this I got from Andy Weil, but it does work. Take your green tea, throw hot water on it, wait 30 seconds, throw the water out, refill the cup, and you have effectively decaffeinated that green tea. Caffeine is highly water soluble and will drop right out of that tea. In 30 seconds, you've probably reduced 90% of your caffeine. Melatonin. These are larger than the doses I use for sleep. I want to emphasize, when you take large doses of melatonin, you actually can get measurable physiological effects in living systems. It's conditional, which means we have some data, but not that much. Very little risk of harm. This is used widely in the alternative cancer world at a dose of 20 milligrams a day. And the important take home here is that people do not get insomnia from large doses of melatonin. It's the burst of melatonin that is affecting some sort of immune receptor. It has nothing to do with the sort of slow, steady release of melatonin in small amounts at night, which keep us asleep. So I just want to emphasize, you aren't going to get resistant to your body's own melatonin. And we have the human experiment of literally tens of thousands of women with breast cancer using 20 milligrams of melatonin a day. N-acetylcysteine. This is a precursor. It helps you make glutathione. Glutathione is very, very important for all sorts of processes. It protects your mitochondria. It helps you get rid of heavy metals. It's sort of the ultimate free radical sink, the ultimate antioxidant, if you will, in our system. And NAC has an added advantage in that it's a mucolytic. So if you're taking 600 to 900 twice a day, that's what BID means, you'll be getting thinner mucus, more mucus, and more effective barrier immunity, mucosal immunity against the COVID. So this is another one that I'm kind of going 2 thumbs up. Everybody is either on this or glutathione as a recommendation. Resveratrol, there is data showing that it helps with MERS-CoV, which is of course a close relative of the COVID-19 virus. We do have data on modulation of the inflammasome. Isn't dangerous. Doses are here. That's expensive, by the way. 150 milligrams of resveratrol daily is going to set you back $50 a month. And so I'm not sure the long-term value is there. Vitamin C. Okay, this is, of course, the old standby. 1 to 3 grams. I wouldn't recommend going above it. There's no data that it helps. It definitely helps with viruses. There's good data on that. Helps with cellular defense, helps with cellular repair. And it's probably anti-fibrotic, but that wasn't specifically addressed in the literature here. Vitamin A. Increases secretory IgA. That sounds like a good idea, doesn't it, now that you know what that is? 10,000 to 25,000 units a day. Caution in pregnancy, caution in women who might be seeking pregnancy. This is not for you. Stay below 8,000 units in that case, and maybe take some extra beta carotene, which does not carry the same risk of birth defects. It modulates cytokine production in a good way, so we know it helps the braking mechanism. Vitamin D. Look at this. Modulation of Th17 cells, modulation of defenses. In other words, this is anti-inflammatory. It creates antimicrobial peptides, which are critical for fighting viruses. It activates the macrophages, which eat the coded viruses. It increases TGF beta, and you can think of TGF beta as the tumor necrosis alpha, the yin and the yang there. The TGF beta is anti-inflammatory, and the tumor necrosis factor is pro-inflammatory. I know, I touched my nose. Reduced progression, and all sorts of other benefits. So you'll get these. Let's talk about zinc. We're getting towards the end here, and we're coming in at exactly my 45-minute goal. 30 to 60 milligrams daily in divided doses. Zinc acetate, picolinate, or glycinate orally. You got to watch the lozenges. There's 5 to 7 milligrams in a zinc gluconate lozenge. If you're doing 10 of those a day, which isn't hard, you might get enough zinc that you probably want to stop any additional zinc supplementation. And any other antiviral or multivitamins you're taking, go check the labels. Keep the total zinc under 60. I kind of go with under 50, but it's fuzzy. And let's just leave it at that. Good evidence that it reduces the severity of symptoms and that it prevents lower respiratory tract infection. And of course, these are in other viruses than COVID, but I think we can say that this falls into the won't hurt, might help, and it has low risk, and it's cheap. So what are we waiting for on the zinc? So we've come to the end of the didactic portion of this. I'm going to stop my screen share, and we're going to take a look at the chats and see what we've got here. I'm going down to turn on, see if I can find Joyce. I'm going to unmute Joyce. All right, Joyce, you're unmuted.
Hey.
Hey there. Thanks. Thank you, my loyal Boswell, for monitoring the chat. Shall we start with some questions?
So right now we've got comments more than questions. So Pat says that you can get organic decaf green tea, which I think is a great thing to point out. Mm-hmm. Jennifer S. just asked, what is the name of the nasal spray? I think she's speaking to the colloidal silver that you were speaking about.
Well, the one I use is, I'll hold it up to the screen. Can you guys see it?
Yep. At least I can.
All right, well, I'll read it. It's Wellness Colloidal Silver Nasal Spray. The company is Source Natural, and it is available on Amazon, and it is available at Emerson Wellevate. Many of you may already have a Wellevate account with Emerson Ecologics, because when my patient, that's where I get my supplies. And while they're a little bit more expensive than I am if you buy directly from us, it is a way to get things when you're traveling or just for convenience sake if you don't feel like schlepping over to the office. That's a way to do it. I do have a system set up where I can leave things in a box behind a locked gate. And so people can get product from me, and I am coming out a couple times a week and doing little, it's kind of like, it's like one of those games that kids used to play back when there were trees in neighborhoods where you'd leave something for your a little letter or maybe a little toy for your friend in a knothole of a tree. Well, I've got my own little tree knothole now, and I'm leaving little goodies for you.
So Jennifer asks again to please say the name of the spray again, one more time.
One more time. It is Wellness Colloidal Silver Nasal Spray, and the company is Source Naturals.
Great. Coos W asks, on zinc, is it preferred to suck on a lozenge so it coats the throat, or is a pill form okay?
Well, if you put it in your mouth, it's going to get into your stomach, and then it's going to get into your bloodstream, and then it's going to get into your mucus. I usually am using the lozenges when you're starting to get prodromal. It's like you've got a little runny nose, it's not your allergy season, or you've got a little sore throat, and you feel like you're fighting something off. That's the time to break out the lozenges and maybe stop your systemic zinc or back it down. Just don't go above 60 milligrams. So 10 lozenges a day would be your maximum. You probably don't need to use that many. What it does locally is it slows viral replication. What it does systemically is it improves the function of your immune cells, both the B and the T cells.
Okay, great. Pat says that VitaCost online has tons of different supplements and food items, and they have good discounts on them. So that's a good point for everybody looking to find things. Although I'd love to know, I know you know that there's a big difference out there in what you can and can get. How do you determine what you're looking at online is a good product or not? Do you have kind of general rules?
Yeah, I do have some general rules, but I have a couple of caveats even then. If you're buying something, the first thing you have to ask yourself is this a fragile molecule? Do I care about cold chain? Because I'm not buying my measles vaccine from Amazon because it's sitting in an un-air conditioned warehouse somewhere, and the cold chain is really important for vaccines. But so if it's a complicated molecule, and if you're wondering if it's a complicated molecule or what its heat stability is, just look it up in Wikipedia, and it will tell you whether it's heat stable or not. And if it's a heat stable molecule, vitamin C, zinc, minerals in general, and most vitamins are fairly heat stable. But when you start talking about, say, glutathione is a very delicate molecule. And so there you really have to watch out for the quality and make sure that and probiotics too, I don't like them to get heated up. So because they hatch, and then over time that batch loses potency. So unfortunately, that's one caveat, is that it depends on what you're buying. The second thing, and you can always just shoot me a question, and I'll tell you whether or not I think you need to buy the expensive version of something, or whether you can get away with the Puritan Pride version. Bioavailability, does the pill break down? A lot of the cheaper calcium pills go right through you, which doesn't help. You don't get the calcium into your bones, you simply get it into the toilet through a very indirect route. It's not useful. The other thing is contamination. So as you all know, a lot of our stuff comes from China. Yeah, and so there have been issues and continue to be issues with environmental pollution. So when we're talking about something that grows, like a plant product, let's take echinacea, for example. I want to know that that plant didn't grow in soil that's contaminated with mercury, because that'll bioconcentrate in the plant. So the company that's making it should have independent certifications of quality. And the company that I use doesn't sell anything that doesn't provide them with annual random spot check, independent lab, purity. So, essentially you hire somebody to walk in, grab stuff out of the bags in your warehouse and go test it. And if it tests positive, then everything that came out of that batch gets pulled. Plus that supplier, you're probably going to be checking everything they send you in all the other bags. I've been to the Metagenics warehouse where they do this, and it's a big deal. It costs a lot of money, and that's part of the additional cost of these products. So if it's growing, you have to worry about heavy metal contamination. If it's a stable molecule, it's much less of a concern. And sometimes you can figure that out on your own, but you can always ask me.
Great. Jennifer asks how to wear a mask correctly.
Okay, good question. I don't have a mask right here, but let's give me a moment and I'll go get one. Here, right here. Thank you. All right, so this is a N95 with a valve. And there's an order to this. So I have a glove on because I cut myself, but ordinarily the mask I just put down on a clean piece of paper. You don't want to put it down on potentially contaminated surfaces. The order is you wash your hands, 20 seconds, la la la, and happy birthday to you. Then you take your clean hands and you put the mask on if it has, and you hold it by the sides over like this, up over the ears. Some of them are tying in back now. If you're using a cloth mask, it's the same. If there's a metal bar, you press down on the metal bar, and you kind of run your hands. This is the one time you're using clean hands. You can touch your face. You're trying to make sure that it's in contact everywhere. Now that's really hard with the flat masks, and so you don't achieve. You'll notice I took it off by going for the ears and trying not to touch the front of the mask at all. Back down on a clean piece of paper, or just a Kleenex is fine. The main thing about the cloth masks is it's hard to get a seal up here. And I have been known in my medical career, also just because the glasses and the goggles steam up, just to take a little bit of paper tape is the best one, and just tape across here. And the other thing for the cloth masks is it needs to tuck under your chin. And if you tie the lower tie high and the upper tie low, you get it to kind of pull around your face, and you get a much better lateral seal, which is probably only important if you're running or breathing really hard. Another additional thing is is a paper towel cut into quarters and then folded. You've got like a double layer of paper towel. If you put that on your face and then put your cloth mask on so that your nose and mouth are covered, you get a little bit better seal. And I mean, it's all about circumstance. But if you're in a situation, let's say in your household, where you're worried someone's sick and they're in the back bedroom or whatever, or God forbid, you don't have a back bedroom, that's the situation where I would break out the paper towels and tie it tight and do all those other things. But with the masks that tie, the tying the lower part up and the upper part down really makes a difference in the fit. So that's a best practice.
Great. Follow-up question. Can you reuse gloves or mask if you reuse them a week later?
A guarded yes. It matters how contaminated you think it is. If you went to a nursing home and there were a bunch of people coughing, that's a place where even in our community, we have reason to expect that there's going to be some COVID. That's a situation where I would probably take additional steps on cleaning the mask. And so let's talk about what you can do there. Turns out you can sterilize N95 masks, and this will go, obviously if it's a fabric mask, you just throw it in the washer. But if it's a paper mask, you can put it on a vegetable steamer rack inside a pot of simmering water for about 15 minutes and then let it dry. So moist heat, about 151 degrees Fahrenheit, kills COVID. That's not very hot. You don't have to boil it. So just like that little tiny simmer that you get when you're braising, or even less than that. Use a thermometer, get the water up to 150, throw the rack in, put the lid on it, come back in 15 minutes, and you will have effectively killed any COVID, probably just about everything else on that mask, because it's kind of the poor man's autoclave. The Instapot, if you have an Instant Pot, put it on keep warm. I called the company, and this was feels like a century ago. It was probably 2 weeks ago, and asked them about this because they had you can autoclave with your Instant Pot link on their website, and I thought that was fascinating. You probably could, but you don't have to. And in fact, if you autoclave these masks, you damage their working. Now with gloves, I have no it depends. Like if I had dipped this glove in hepatitis, laden blood, I would probably not do this form of cleaning. But if I just went outside and I'm wearing gloves because my hands are are getting rashed out from the hand sanitizer, which is now a thing, I would wash my hands in the gloves and just keep the gloves on. Then when I got home, I would wash the gloves in soapy water, warm soapy water, doesn't have to be hot. Turn them inside out, hang them on the clothesline outside, let them dry. I actually have a picture of gloves being dried this way from Nicaragua way back in the 80s when they were just coming out of their revolution, and I was on a medical trip there, and they couldn't afford to. What's the purpose of the gloves? Is the gloves to protect the wearer? Then they just need to be as clean as hands can be. If the purpose is to protect the surgical patient whose belly is about to be opened, yeah, you don't want to reuse those gloves. But we have to start thinking. We've been so automatic and so wasteful in medicine because we've had this unlimited supply of boxes of stuff that now we have to start and think, can I clean this? Can I discard it? And the answer is yes, you can clean gloves and you can clean masks. Reusing them a week later is probably fine, although I have seen studies where they're picking up viral RNA as much as 18 days after the space is completely vacated, but we don't know if that's viable virus, and honestly, I doubt very much that it is. So you've always got to go behind the question. Barbara asked about inexpensive curcumin, and I do want to address that. Curcumin is expensive. The 500 to twice a day dose that I posted up there is for the really good expensive stuff that absorbs really well. If you want to use something cheap, you can. Here's my advice. Turmeric powder, fresh turmeric powder, or go buy the root and grate it yourself. And then stuff it into capsules because it's strong, and so you'll want to put it in capsules. Mix it with a little black pepper, and that how much black pepper? About 10% by weight, and the black pepper helps release the curcumin. The amount that you're going to want to take is about 2 teaspoons twice a day of the grated turmeric mixed with the 10% by weight black pepper. And that's a bit more work, but it's very cheap. I see one I wanted to answer. This is about the jade windstring. He's just saying that he's found it very helpful. And I agree. I think it is a good agent. Someone else said it's available on Amazon. So other questions that you spotted there, Joyce?
Yeah. One question is, do any of the supplements that you've recommended interfere with antidepressants or anti-bipolar medications? Excuse me.
No, not to my knowledge. I didn't see anything about that.
Okay, great. With regard to the melatonin, do you have a type of, like, it's a large dose, you said, do you have a time of day you recommend or don't recommend taking it?
No, I don't. I think at that dose you can take it whenever it's convenient and you feel like you can be consistent about it. It won't make you sleepy as long as the lights are on anyway.
Great. How much and how often with the nasal spray? With
the colloidal spray, I typically keep one in the car, and I squirted myself when I left the house this morning. And if I'm going to go into a market or I'm coming into the clinic, I'll do a dose both, sort of before and after. As it gets hotter, I won't be able to leave it. I could probably leave colloidal silver in the car, but I get a little nervous about leaving things and letting them heat up. But for this, it probably doesn't matter, quite honestly. There's a little cavity at the base of your nose. You know it's there because when it's full, you know that your nose is about to drip. You get this very distinct sensation. And so that bowl, if you will, what you want is to spray the stuff around in your sniff it up, and then let it drip back down and fill that bowl. And so now any virus that gets inhaled is either going to bounce off of the colloidal silver on the wall that's still clinging there, or it's going to be washed down into this bowl and destroyed there.
Excellent.
I think this is perfect. We're sort of coming to the end. We've got, are any last pressing questions that you spot, Joyce?
Nope. I'm not seeing anything come up.
All right, great. So folks, thank you very much for coming. As I said, I'll do a little editing on the video and then attach those two documents, the self-assessment tool and the summary of all of the slides that's in a much prettier format, obviously done by someone with a degree in graphic design, as opposed to the slides I showed you. But there you go. The next conference is still up in the air. I hope to be doing a series of these. Got a few bugs to work out of the system, particularly in terms of setting up the presentation. But I just want to thank everyone for coming, and I hope that you found it valuable. This is me saying, in fact, let's go back and say it. So long and stay healthy.